It's Dr. Essie Knuckles. In 2017, I finally decided that I was going to stop work, so I just quit. And after coming to Louisa and discovering some of the things that were missing, the first thing I did, I went out and purchased this book, big book, say Homes in Louisa. You know, this is supposed to be historical stuff. And I looked through this entire book, and I didn't see one home that I had ever been in. There were no black homes in it. So that triggered something in my mind. How can, you said this is Louisa, and there are all these black people that live in Louisa, and they are not mentioned in here. So I went to the museum, the historical museum, and I met a lady there, and I asked her if some kind of way we could incorporate black history and homes and things in the history in Louisa. So she and I taught a class on writing your history. So since then, I have been working with people in this group to write their black history because they lived in Louisa and so much of it is missing. So the museum gave a display here one day, and they talked about the schools in Louisa and all of the people that had attended and everything. And one of the questions was asked, how many people attended the school that's now the Art Center? And of course, nobody black held up their hand because they didn't understand that segregation, you couldn't go to these schools. So it's so important that we get our black history told because it's being taken out of the schools. We exist, we were here, there were families that made major contributions to Louisa, and I would like to see that indicated in when they tell the history of Louisa. So I'm working diligently with people to get their history told about their experiences in Louisa. I moved to Louisa from Old Town Alexandria. My family has been a part of Louisa for more than 70 years. I have a 94-year-old sister. My sister's husband was John Thomason. He was the first black man on the board of supervisors, so you probably already know what family that I'm in. I'm a retired clinical criminal forensic psychologist, the first black female licensed psychologist in an all-male prison, Lorton, Virginia. I have been a university associate professor at Howard University. I'm a Howard University graduate, and I'm an AKA. For you, those of you who don't know what that is, that's my sorority, and I'm proud of that. Also, I was instructor at Virginia State College, then it's now university. I have, after working at Howard University as associate professor, I went to Lorton, where I was the first female psychologist, licensed, black, and all those other things. They said, some people said that I was a trailblazer. I didn't think of that. I just thought that there was a need. When I was at the university, I worked with very bright, intelligent students who were working on PhDs and everything, and I knew that they would make it. But nobody wanted to go to prison and work with people that had been incarcerated. And I try to get people to see, some of these people were your neighbors last week, and they get arrested because they decided to sell drugs for the people that were bringing the drugs over here. And it was not black people because they had no planes, no boats, or any of those things. They were just trying to make a living to support their families. So I went to Lorton, and I worked there for years. And then some sort of way, the prison got turned over to private prisons. When it became private prisons, I worked for CCA. But I worked, then they moved my office to D.C., so I worked in D.C. in Southeast at the treatment center. But we have some very bright minds that are incarcerated for really stupid stuff that they've done, selling drugs, kinds of things that normally you might have gotten a second chance someplace else, but they weren't given second chances. And we are losing a lot of our workforce and everything by having people incarcerated. And I was like, why couldn't the government think about how much money you're spending per year to keep somebody incarcerated? Why don't you spend that amount of money in teaching them a viable trade that they can be making money and they would be paying taxes and it would be helping the government? So that was something that really touched my heart, and I thought that I made a contribution. And also professional women didn't like to work in prison. They were like, I would interview clinical psychologists. They would come and say, no, Dr. Knuckles, I'm not doing this, because you're locked in with these people. And I was like, well, I saw that person on the street last week, kind of stuff. These are people, maybe sometimes if you just spoke to that person, was kind to them, you may have had a different experience with them. So that's about my career. I came to Louisa because my sister was here, and I thought I would come down and retire here. I looked for a house in Louisa. I did not like Louisa because there are no buses, no trains, no planes, no way to get out of Louisa. However, when I came here, I met someone who was trying to sell me a house unsuccessfully. He ended up buying me a house. My husband, Mr. Louis Stevens, who used to be the principal in one of the schools here. That's before I knew him, and he was the person in charge of transportation. That was all before I knew him. So now I'm in Louisa, and I find it most interesting place because the people here have not had some of the experiences that I want them to have. For example, many people here in this group have never ridden a train, so I'm trying to get the train system to let these older people ride the train. And one of the things I found out, they didn't have a lift for people in wheelchairs, so they're in the process of taking care of that. So we have a lady that's in the group here, and we went to this presentation that the University of Virginia professor gave, and he talked about all the schools in Louisa, and she held up her hand. She said, well, you didn't mention my school. And he said, we have all the schools that were in Louisa. And we said, well, how could you say you have all the schools? This person went to school, graduated from a school, and you didn't mention a school. And now they're researching, they found out that one of the schools, her grandfather had privately paid for the school, but of course the school was eventually burned down. But that's not unusual in black communities that schools get burned down. So she is now in the process of writing that history, and I'm assisting her with that. There are many more people here that have some really wonderful backgrounds, and I would like to see their stories told. I'm an 81-year-old woman who's recovering from open heart surgery. I still have not done all the things I want to do. I love to travel. I've been all over the world. I've been to Sydney, Australia, Queensland. I've been to Africa. I've been to South America, Iceland, where else? I'm probably missing someplace I've been. But I love to travel. I love to learn about different cultures, and that is my traveling experience. When I travel, I want to meet the indigenous people. I want to learn what their experiences are. And on my trip that I took this summer, I met a Native American, and he said his grandfather worked in World War II for the Army, and he was promised this great housing and everything. And when he came back to the United States, what happened, he got a piece of land. There was no water on the land, and I was in Wyoming, and he was going like, the only way his grandfather survived, it was another Native American that lived next door that helped them survive, gave them water, provided food for them because they had no way of doing it. And I was going like, how can we as a country continue to do these inhumane things to people that go out and fight for our freedom and everything. So that bothered me a great deal too. And this summer I went across for the second time. I've been all over the United States, and including Hawaii and Alaska several times. But this summer I was just burnt out. I needed to do something different, and I went on a 22-state trip across the country and back. I'm also the author of several books. My most famous bestseller is in the bookstores now, in Barnes & Noble, on Amazon, Kindle, and all those. It's My Children's Mind Will Not Be the Devil's Workshop by Dr. Essie Knuckles. So I hope all of you will read it. It was featured in the Central Virginian about growing, and it's a true story about my siblings, our growing up in Roanoke, Virginia. That's where I'm originally from. And we tell this story about what we had to experience in the 50s during Jim Crow period. And I was 7.5, and I thought Jim Crow was a man. But I learned that it was the conditions that we lived in. And some of that seems to be replaying itself in what's going on now in a different way, but it's the same premise and everything. And you have to know that being a black child growing up in the United States, it's very stressful. We have to learn additional things that other children don't have to learn. We have to learn what you learn. We have to learn how to survive as a black child in this country just because of the color of our skin. And it was so difficult for me to understand that people didn't like you just because you had a beautiful skin color. But then there are Native Americans, the same things happen. And as I travel and I talk with these people, they were like, we experienced this, and we know to the degree that they were just slaughtered. And it makes me sad inside to think that we just can't all get along, because my parents taught us we are all God's children. And God loves all of us, and maybe some of us live different places, and we need our skin color to be different because it may be really hot this place, and it may be extremely cold some other place, but we need to learn to love each other and to get along. And I think if we follow Martin Luther King Jr.'s teaching, that we would be better people all around. Thank you.
Of course, thank you.